Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by CJ Vogel. It is time for Longhorn Weekly, and this edition of Longhorn Weekly is brought to you by Bluebird Organizing. We'll tell you a little bit about Bluebird here in just a few moments, but let's get on with it. CJ, spring practice. We had the Saturday practice. We recapped that here on the channel and at ontexasfootball.com. Longhorns back on the practice field on Monday. It's going to be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday for Sark and company. CJ, as we've gotten through 1 week of spring practice, what's top of mind for you as far as what you want to hear in week 2?
Just the physicality that shows up. And that sounds as boring as it gets, right? But the pads will come on. And look, we got to dealing with the brand new offensive line, dealing with a lot of new faces on the defensive line. Does that stand up and kind of compare to what Texas had a year ago when you were very old, when you were very experienced on that offensive line? You had that same level of fifth-year guys on the defensive line. So it sounds boring, but hey, we know that the team's fast. We know that there's a lot of speed. We know that there's a lot of athleticism on the outside and in the back end. But what does it look like up front? Because, hey, pads come on. This is supposed to be a different level of play in practice. So that's what I'm hoping to hear from. But, hey, also with Arch Manning, and he showcased it a little bit in week 1, I was told, just the command of the offense. How does he create? How does he showcase more with his legs in team situations? That's what I'll be looking forward to as well.
You know what's impressive about Arch, and we saw Arch for about 30 seconds on Saturday when we were waiting for recruits outside of Moncrief, and Arch was leaving the facility, which, by the way, I think you pointed it out. He timed that perfectly because we had Texas relays and a recruiting weekend going on. There was people all around Moncrief, all around the front of the building, and it just so happened that by the time everybody cleared out, there wasn't a soul between the front door to Moncrief and the parking garage across the street. That was when Arch left. So I'm like, what beautiful timing for Arch to get out of the facility where nobody can bother him. He could just go on his way. But you look at Arch physically, CJ, when he doesn't have the shoulder pads or the helmet on, you're just watching him basically in a T-shirt and shorts walk out of the building. I think you forget how big he is. And the reason why I point that out is one thing that I want to hear more about, and hopefully we get to hear from Sark at some point soon, the impact that Neil Brown's going to have on this offense, specifically when it comes to the quarterback run game. Now, I know when we talk about running Arch, letting Arch run the football, again, I'm not talking about turning him into Sam Ehlinger and having him run the football 20 times in a game. That's not what we're dealing with here. And I think a lot of people might go to that Ohio State game and go, okay, well, how serious was the head injury, or was there not a head injury that Arch suffered in that game? I don't think Arch or Sark, I don't think anybody's ever really come out and confirmed it publicly, even though we've heard behind the scenes what may or may not have happened. But I think people get a little nervous. But look, you pointed it out too. And again, I'll give you credit, CJ. You can just take that hat off. You're tipping it so much today. Garrett Green was a really prolific rushing quarterback, believe it or not, for Neil Brown over the last 2 seasons at West Virginia. So this is a guy that understands how to scheme up the quarterback run game. So I want to hear how they're going to get the most out of Arch's legs. We've talked about changing the launch point for the quarterback. How does the route tree change with Arch? But at what point do you really start to hone in on, all right, here's what we want quarterback run game wise. Let's build on it. I want to know when Sark and company are going to do that. Let me get your take on this, though, before we move on and talk about other things other than spring football. We heard that even as of Saturday, basically through the first week, when you do things like inside run, and really Saturday was kind of the first taste of it, sounds like the interior offensive line is ahead of the interior defensive line. I don't take that as a negative against the interior defensive line because you do have some new faces in there that are learning the scheme. I take that more of that's what I wanted to hear, even with Neto Mazzullo taking over at left guard. Cole Hudson started a lot of games, even though he's in a new position at center. And DJ Campbell's your veteran, your crafty veteran now on the offensive line. Yeah, that interior O-line should be ahead of your interior D-line. So, CJ, I think as stuff like that gets out, my take is I'm more encouraged by the offensive line than I am discouraged by the defensive line. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And this was kind of where I was last year going into the spring when you had everybody returning once again on this offense line, specifically on the interior, and it wasn't really the case. Now, I think that was more to Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton kind of standing up and being those 2 veteran guys up front. Texas doesn't yet have that, nor do they have guys that are all too familiar with the basic, defensive line room right now, right? When you talk about the ins and outs of the system, what they're asked to do, how many blocks they're asked to eat up versus just going out and playing football. On the flip side, all of these guys on the offensive line have been in the system for 4 years. You took Neto Mazzullo, Cole Hudson, DJ Campbell, all came together to Austin in that 22 recruiting class. So this is year 4 for all of them. And hey, we did the math last week, Jeff. This is a bigger group, right? Cole Hudson has 10 pounds on what Jake Majors had at center last year. Nato Umeozulu pushing 330, about 10 pounds heavier than where Hayden Connor was at this point last year. DJ Campbell, look, he's going into year 3 as a starter. So I'm excited for this group again because that interior push, that movement of bodies in front of you fits the strengths of all three, to be quite frank about it. So what can they do cohesively is where this next level will go for me in spring, but that's a great sign early on. And of course, what can you get out of that defensive line bunch as the spring continues? Hopefully there's some good back and forth. Of course, we're all hoping for that, but right now, early signs are positive that the offensive line is figuring some stuff out early on in spring.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on the channel about Trey Moore getting some more run at off-ball linebacker. We've talked about the emergence of Cade Phillips at corner, potentially competing with Kobe Black for that job opposite of Manny Muhammad. We've talked about Parker Livingstone's emergence. So a lot of good stuff on the channel and on ontexasfootball.com, and a lot more to come as the Longhorns get into the second week of spring practice. CJ, let's talk a little bit of recruiting. Now, we had Longhorn City Limits over the weekend, and we recapped that. Nicholas Robertson, the latest verbal commitment for Texas in the 2026 recruiting class, the second offensive lineman after Max Wright of Melissa. But CJ, as we get into this week and what to look forward to, Booby Feaster, the 4-star plus wide receiver out of DeSoto who's reclassified, he made a visit to Texas over the weekend. But when you talk about receivers, Jerry Hamilton reported this on Monday morning at ontexasfootball.com. Jabari Mack, a guy that you got a chance to see, you went down to Destrin on your way to the Senior Bowl and got a chance to catch up with Jabari Mack. LSU commit, but he's going to be back in Austin, and this is also on the heels of Tristan Keys visiting Texas A&M over the weekend, the LSU commit, on top of Texas being in the hunt for Aaron Gregory, who's committed to Texas A&M, on top of Naeem Burrows, who's committed to Clemson, but that's not going to stop Texas and Florida and everybody else from recruiting these guys. CJ, when you look at the out-of-state wide receiver board, these guys might be committed somewhere, but Chris Jackson and Sark and this staff, they're treating these guys like you aren't committed anywhere. You're still there for the taking, and we're going to recruit you as hard as we possibly can. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And what's interesting with all of these early commitments, Jeff, is, hey, for a lot of them, now I'm not saying all, but for a lot of them, it's just, hey, let's set the price, right? In this day and age, especially with what's coming down the road with revenue sharing, a lot of that's just kind of how recruiting is, we know what gets the door open. Now, how do you swing that door open? I think Sark and company are very good at that, especially late in cycles. Texas has done tremendous when it comes to a Ryan Wingo, a Jamie French, a Kalik Lockett, landing these big-time recruitments. Michael Terry over in December, right? So it's early, and I don't think this staff stresses at all about these early commitments because we've seen success later in the cycle, especially when you look at teams like LSU. When folks commit to schools like LSU who are kind of in that rut when it comes to they're supposed to be here and they're not, right? Does that happen with LSU again this year and what's apparently going to be a pretty hot seat for Brian Kelly this year? We'll wait and see. Texas, of course, needs to go handle their own business. But point being, they've stuck around long enough and gone through this plenty of times now each cycle that these don't mean a whole lot. These commitments don't mean a whole lot this early on.
I like, Charlie Strong used to call it, hey, when guys commit early, you're making a reservation, and let's just borrow your line and just make it the official stance on early commitments. You're just setting the price for yourself. Let's set that NIL floor and then see if it'll rise as things go on. A little bit more from Jerry. Mason James from Norman North was offered by Texas on March 9th. He's scheduled to be in Austin for that April 12th visit weekend, which, as we know, CJ, the next big unofficial visit weekend is going to be April 12th. So we'll see how things progress between Texas and Mason James. Look, I know you say, hey, he's from Norman North, right? He's probably going to end up at Oklahoma. It's crazy to sound. Some guys that you think, okay, they're OU locks. Some guys just want to get out of the state of Oklahoma, believe it or not. That does happen a time or two. So Texas going to continue to recruit Mason James. Caden Finley, son of Jermichael Finley out of Aledo. We mentioned Aaron Gregory out of Georgia and Caden Dixon Wyatt out of California. All three of those guys are expected to be on campus in April. They're locked in for June official visits. Jerry did report. I just mentioned Naeem Burrows from Jacksonville in the bowl school. Shout out to Chipper Jones, bowl school alum. Canceled all his official visits. CJ, Dabo Swinney's got that no visit policy for his commits. I got a feeling this is going to be the one that really tests that. Canceled all the visits now, but well, you know how this works. You've done this long enough now. Look, it's not going to be anything. Hey, when Texas visits Florida in early October, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Nate Burrows just so happens to find his way to Gainesville for that game and maybe a couple other games here and there. In other words, that Dabo no visit policy is going to really get put to the test.
Yeah, it absolutely will. And credit to Dabo because he's stuck to his guns and the way that he's, philosophically built when it comes to recruiting. To get a commitment that early from a caliber of receiver like Naeem Burrows, that's pretty impressive, right? Especially for Clemson, who made the playoff last year, but hasn't yet been to that status that we've seen in the late 20 teens, right? So for Clemson to be in this position, I think that's a big win for them. But does that sustain, especially when you start hearing about some of these numbers that will be thrown around on official visits from other prospects? And you talk about it, we talk about it. Recruits talk. So when they start going on these visits in June, does word trickle back to Naeem and say, ooh, maybe I should test the waters once again. Maybe I need to open back up. Maybe I need to at least talk about going on other visits elsewhere. But we'll see. Again, first day of April is tomorrow? So long way to go in these recruitments, but that's going to be one that certainly tests that no visit policy from Clemson and Dabo Swinney.
Yeah, if you're up for following recruiting on social media, be advised now for the April Fool's jokes that I'm sure are going to be out there aplenty tomorrow. CJ, before we move on and wrap this up, talking about some other things on the 40 acres, let's tell everybody about our sponsor for this edition of Longhorn Weekly. That is Perry Ricard and Bluebird Organizing. Is your wife feeling overwhelmed? Does she consistently mention how she wishes she could find items more easily, or how she wants to park her car in the garage, but there's no space? Or maybe she complains about tripping over all of the kids' toys. Are you, as her husband, feeling at a complete loss as to how you can help? With spring cleaning well on its way and Mother's Day just around the corner, give your wife the gift of a lifetime with a customized organizing session from Bluebird Organizing. Perry, the owner of Bluebird Organizing, will come into your space without judgment and give your wife the organized kitchen, closet, playroom, and or garage of her dreams. Plus, Perry will take all the donations for you at the end, leaving you and your family ready to enjoy the new space. It's time to give your wife a gift she'll love for years to come. Call or text 737-346-7779 to book your free in-person consultation today. Again, that's 737-346-7779 for Perry Ricard and Bluebird Organizing. And thanks to Perry so much for sponsoring this edition of Longhorn Weekly. All right, CJ, let's move on. Let's talk a little Longhorn baseball. We both got put on the spot last week, and I said, hey, it's tough to get a road sweep in the SEC. I'm not expecting a sweep. You expected a sweep. I should have listened to you because Texas went and dominated Missouri in Columbia for 3 games, got the sweep, swept the Friday game, the Saturday doubleheader. Baseball America has Texas ranked number 3 in the country heading into this week. A massive top 5 series at Dish Falk this weekend. Just had one not too long ago, a top 10 series with LSU, but this is going to be a top 5 series between Texas and Georgia. CJ, another week, another blockbuster matchup in the SEC. What'd you like the most about Texas getting that sweep in Columbia? Obviously, other than me wanting a Will Gasparino breakout, him to build off that home run against Sam, and Lord did he, had 5 home runs and 10 at-bats at one point. Haven't seen it come out yet. I'm going to go ahead and guess he'll be your SEC player of the week. But other than Will Gasparino getting on track, what stood out to you in the Missouri sweep?
Yeah, he must have been using those torpedo bats that the Yankees have been trotting out there, Jeff, because my goodness, he was on fire. I'm with you. I don't know what someone else in the conference could have done to have taken that player of the week title away from Will Gasparino, but what a weekend. And again, that's kind of what I was hoping to see. Someone from the bottom of that order catch fire. And Texas is going to need that moving forward. Of course, the good news coming out of Columbia is that you won all 3 games and you got home a day earlier. The bad news is now you're a little nicked up, right? Adrian Rodriguez, Max Ballou, Rylan Galvan, really you're 1, 2, 3 in the heart of that order when you add, Mendoza in that mix as well. What do they look like health-wise going into this series this weekend? Will they play Tuesday in the midweek? I would assume for most of those guys, probably not. But you got a top 5 matchup coming up. Yes, you won all 3 games this past weekend, but when it comes to playing against the big dogs in the conference, you'd love to be at full strength, and right now it's just a big unknown. So Texas, again, they did a great job stacking up wins that they're supposed to stack when it comes to RPI, when it comes to those end-of-season regional hosting seeds. But these are games that you look at and say, okay, how do we stack up? How do we compare? Texas a little dinged up. I'm not sure if it's going to be a great weekend for that estimation and judgment for the long run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you mentioned the midweek, Texas taking on Texas State. Now, when the schedule came out, we figured, hey, this will be David Pierce coming back to Dish Falk. Well, we didn't anticipate Rice making a coaching change this early in the season, nor did we anticipate David Pierce would leave his post on Steve Trout's staff in San Marcos and take the Rice job. David Pierce already taken over that Rice program, so no David Pierce, but Texas State. Look, these midweek matchups, you get Texas State coming up I-35 for a midweek game. It can get a little rowdy in the stands. It can get a little rowdy in the parking lot. So everybody, enjoy your midweek baseball responsibly, please, everybody. And let's all have a good time and enjoy the game. But again, that massive weekend series coming up against Georgia. CJ, I'll say this too. One more baseball note. Ruger Riojas got the start in the second game of the doubleheader on Saturday. Like I said, we know Luke Harrison is the Saturday guy. Jared Spencer is the Friday guy. Those guys are locked into their roles. But Ruger Riojas was magnificent against LSU and against Missouri in that second game on Saturday. 7 innings, 2 hits, no runs, 10 strikeouts, 10 Ks for Ruger Riojas. So maybe the Longhorns have found their number 3 starter. We'll see what happens. I think Schloss is still going to leave it TBD because it's worked for you so far. Why would you change it at this point? But we'll see what happens. Texas softball, shout out to Mike White. They lost the first game in Starkville, came back, won the next 2. No midweek game. They are at Missouri. So the baseball team just got back from Columbia. The softball team goes to Columbia this weekend for a Friday, Saturday, Sunday 3-game series against the Tigers. And CJ, will end this edition of Longhorn Weekly talking about the basketball transfer portal. Dalen Swain, the transfer forward from Xavier, 6'8" wingman, he will be on campus starting today for a Monday-Tuesday visit. 11 points, 5.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 1.6 steals per game as a sophomore for Sean Miller. And then Ryan Conwell, a 16.5 point per game score, 2.7 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1.3 steals for the Musketeers this past season. Shot over 40% from 3. These guys both played for Sean Miller. Texas, the perceived leader for both. CJ, we'll see. Look, Sean Miller's got a long way to go to finish off this roster. It's just, this is in its infancy, building the roster for the 2025-26 season. Texas already lost Devon Pryor to the transfer portal. He's now headed to Oregon. But if you can get Ryan Conwell and Dalen Swain, that's a really, really good start, to say the least, for Sean Miller and this basketball program building the roster.
Yeah, on top of juggling who returns from the current roster, who still has eligibility to the portal, and then, of course, these 2 guys out of Xavier, you're building with a lot of familiarity, hopefully, if that's the case. If they were to make the move over, now you got some guys that know the system, know the terminology, some of that vernacular, and that speeds up what could be a year 1 season for Sean Miller. So, yeah, I'm all for it. I think it'd be great if Texas were to land both. If you get one, hey, that's good as well. But those are 2 big-time players that Texas would love to have, and then start meshing and building that roster from there.
You remember, if you remember Chris Beard's first roster, it was kind of a really mishmash of some portal guys. You had Avery Benson, who was at Tech. Jalen Tyson was the one recruit Chris Beard had at Tech. He came with that staff, and then you had some holdovers. So the only difference this time around, CJ, probably not as many holdovers you'd think. For me, as long as Kendall Weaver's part of the group of holdovers, yeah, I think you've got a chance to have a roster that can compete in the SEC in year 1, but it's going to take everything Sean Miller and the staff can do to put a competitive roster on the floor. Not an easy task, but you get those 2 guys from Xavier, like I said, that'll be one heck of a start. And tonight, as we're sitting here recording this, good luck to Vic Schaefer and the Texas women in the Elite 8 against TCU. Texas women have not been to a Final Four, CJ, since 2003. If they can beat TCU, get over that Elite 8 hump, Vic Schaefer can get this program back to the Final Four, where Jody Conrad in its heyday had Texas in the Final Four on somewhat of a regular basis. So here's to Coach Schaefer, friend of the channel, friend of On Texas Football, getting over the hump and getting the ladies to the Final Four in Tampa. That will be this weekend. All right, CJ, that's going to do it. Again, thank you to Perry Ricard and Bluebird Organizing. Don't forget, get over to ontexasfootball.com. Still got our promo going. Use the promo code OTFOG. That's OTFOG, $49.95, 1 year of access to ontexasfootball.com. Right now is when you want it. because trust me, we had a lot over the weekend about the big recruiting weekend, the Longhorn City Limits weekend. Got another big unofficial visit weekend coming up on April 12th. All the spring football news, notes, and nuggets, June official visits. We'll have SEC media days before you know it. We've got SEC spring meetings coming up. Then camp will be here, then the season. So Sean Miller putting together this basketball roster, a new era of Texas hoops. We got baseball, softball. We'll have it all for you at ontexasfootball.com and here on the channel. So again, get over to the site right now. Use that promo code OTFOG and get you 1 year of access for $49.95. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Longhorn Weekly. For CJ Vogel, I'm Jeff Howe. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, hook 'em.